All right. Good morning to everyone. Welcome to the Alliance of Angels webinar today on the Federal Grant Procurement for Small Businesses. We're privileged to have Robert Finney join us today to share his expertise with us on this subject. But before we go into it, I want just a few points of logistics. Right. First of all, if you are not speaking, right, so we ask that you please put yourself on mute so we kind of keep all the echoes and all the background noise down to a minimum. So thank you very much in advance for that, so we can have a great learning experience. But that said, if you want to ask a question, engage our speaker today, with any input, etc., feel free to jump in. This is a regular Zoom meeting, and you can, just feel free to send your questions. Speak up is the best. Or if you like, you can also slip your questions into the chat window. All right, and I'm just going to say a few words about my organization, Alliance of Angels. So my name is EJ, and I run this organization. We are an angel group here in Seattle. There's 140 angels in my organization. Every year we put about 10 million into 20 companies. Most companies that are fundraising from us, they're looking for a total of between $500,000 and 1.5. And my typical check size is 250 to 500. Right, and the way money comes in from us is usually 4 to 6 people, each person investing 25,000, 50,000, or 100,000, and the sum total of that is 250 to 500. Right, we are a sector agnostic investor. But that said, about half our investments are in tech, about a quarter are in consumer, and the rest are in life sciences, hardware, energy, etc. Right, and we are also stage agnostics, never too early to open a conversation with us. Right, our only hard filter is that we focus on companies that are headquartered in the Pacific Northwest. So if you're an entrepreneur, you're dialing in today, feel free to, my email's down there, you're fundraising, feel free to get in touch. Right, or if you are an investor and you're interested in getting off my organization, feel free to send me a note as well. Okay, and with that, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to hand over a session to our speaker for today, Robert Finney.
All right. Well, first, thank you for inviting me to speak. I thoroughly enjoy assisting companies with grants. I find it, I was just very intellectually stimulating, all the different companies and things that I get involved in. So I love what I'm doing. But I want to get started this. We'll focus today on SBIR and STTRs. I've really tried to focus this more from the perspective of investors. So if I was an investor, what would I want to know about the program? Both, is it applicable for me? Is it going to be successful for me? So there we go. I have some references here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. They're more for your reference only. These are the sources, many of which I went to use for the presentation. I also want to emphasize that a lot of what I'm going to present is from my experience over the many years with the SBIR to STTR programs, my own personal experience and feedback from program officers and directors that will be part of this. And so let's start with, who am I? I have a doctorate degree in biology from the University of Iowa many years ago, lower eukaryotes, yeast, and those kinds of things. I did postdoctoral work in cancer molecular genetics at the University of California, San Francisco. I was in the pharmaceutical industry for a number of years. I led development teams. I've submitted IND applications for drug products. I was then CEO of a majority-owned subsidiary for genetic engineering, and that's really where I spent a lot of my career. I had my own company shortly after that, focused on genetic engineering for about 15 years. It was supported in part through SBIR grants, but also a lot of contract work for pharmaceutical companies. I have been grant consulting now for 5, 6, 7 years. As you can see, I'm getting older, but it keeps me active, keeps me interested. I enjoy doing it. And I'm also currently assisting a company called Cardiotheranostics, kind of as our acting COO for some programs. So that is me. And I lost my chat screen. There we go. I have a few other slides in here, some, again, references mostly. This is a place you can visit. It'll give you some other sources for information if you like. For example, Life Science Washington has some seminars in the area on SBIR, STTR grants. I'll repeat a little bit of that, but a lot of it will be different too. There are some online tutorials, again, pointing you in the direction of some other references. I'm really not going to go through a lot of how writing a proposal, but more, you know, will this work for you? Will this work for some potential investments that you have, some potential companies you might be supporting? And I view this whole process, as most processes, from a business perspective. So I look at things from customer basis. So I view SBIR, STTR programs as a customer. So the federal government is basically a customer of mine. They're providing me with money, and I'm providing them with goods and services. So my training, I've had some in business development, is to kind of look at the customer first. What are their needs? And I need to fulfill those needs. So if you look at the mission statement for the SBIR STTR program, it is to support scientific excellence in technology, technological innovation, and to build a strong national economy. So what does that kind of translate to? Well, there are a few key points that very often clients of mine kind of forget. They think, all right, I'm here and they're to give me money and it's all about me. It's really not. It's really both the agencies and you. So the SBIR STTR programs report to Congress, and it's important that they focus on innovation and that those innovations reach the market and that are successful. So it's really important for these particular grants to focus on both innovation and commercialization. And so both of those need to show up in grant proposals. Again, the agencies have their needs, and essentially you are there for their success, to promote their success. So you might consider it as a partnership. It really is a partnership. And you know, a lot of people get this idea that these things they're rigged, they're crapshoots. It's really not. These agencies, because they have their needs, because they need to be successful, they are searching for the best opportunities for research funding for these small businesses to meet their needs. The dollars are substantial. So, first of all, some eligibility considerations. Companies need to be for profit, and the work must be done in the United States. Now, if you don't meet these, you know, you have to be for profit, of course, but if you're not in the United States, there are always ways of working around some of these issues. So these things should never stop you. So operated under 500 people in the US, and it's really focused on research and development. It's not, and commercialization. It's not for purchasing equipment or commercialize something that's already ready to be developed. It's really for research. I put this in for venture capital. It used to be that any VC supported company was not eligible for SBIRs or STTRs. That has changed a number of years ago. Firms are now, if they don't have a majority of the company, then that is allowed. And even if they have a majority of the company, if the VC firm is itself 50% owned or controlled by members who are citizens or permanent resident aliens of the United States, then it's fine, no problems. And even if they're majority owned, a lot of the agents. Oh, got a feedback there. All right, I'm getting feedback. I think somebody might have their voice on. There we go. All right, so there are some agencies that even if you're majority owned, will still support the program. So I've never had a case yet where we couldn't fund a company or do a proposal for a venture capital funded companies. So another important questions that I'm always asked is about intellectual property. And here that basically it falls under the Bayh-Dole Act. I suggest that if you're considering a company, if you're submitting an SBIR submitted proposal, that you actually look at the legal ramifications of it in terms of intellectual property. But the bottom line here is that if the government funds the development of your innovation, and you will grant them a royalty-free license to use your innovation worldwide. However, the government doesn't have the right to commercialize your invention, and you have the sole right to make money from the invention. So again, I've never heard of any circumstances where the government, where intellectual property was a concern. Again, the sole purpose of these programs is to enable the commercialization of these technologies. They are substantial dollars. So SBIR program is 3.2 billion each year. STTR is less, but it's still 450 million. So there's a substantial amount of investment from the federal government into this program. So what do I mean by SBIR and STTR? There are some differences. So in an SBIR program, the partnering requirements are not stringent. You can have partners if you want, but you're not required to. The primary employment of the principal investigators, so the lead for the project, must be within the company, so greater than 50%. You can have subcontracts. The program size is large, as we said. Majority of VCs, some of them will accept it or not, but still, that's never been a problem and won't be. There are 11 agencies in this. In contrast, STTR is associated with a nonprofit research institution partner. The principal investigator can be employed either by the research institution or the small business. There are some requirements for how much work needs to be done at each institution. So 40% in the small business, 30% minimum in the research partner. Majority VCs are not allowed for STTR programs. And there's only a few agencies that actually fall into that category. And so this is just kind of a list of the agencies. The ones in blues are SBIR only, and the green are SBIR and STTR. And the reason I show this slide is just to show the diversity of agencies in this program. There's agriculture, there's commerce, the Department of Defense, which has got quite broad coverage for a lot of things. Department of Energy, Health and Human Services. It's pretty broad. So if you have a product, if it's innovative, if it's impacting the economy in some way, there's likely a home for it somewhere in this program. There are 3 phases in this process: a phase 1, 2, sometimes a 2B, and a phase 3. The phase 1 is primarily a proof of concept, typically lasting 6 to 1 year. I put 256,000. That's the NIH standard amount, but those amounts can vary depending on the agency, and even within the agencies, what grants they propose. But generally speaking, you can think of 200 to 400,000 for a phase 1 project, focusing mostly on proof of concept. The phase 2 is typically a 2-year program. Anywhere from 1.5 to 2 million is pretty typical, but it does vary by the agency again. After phase 2, there's an option for a phase 2B. It's not used very often, but it is an option. And then finally, there's a commercialization phase, which is not supported financially. There are caps. Again, these caps do vary. There are waivers to some of these, and SBIR phase 2B is optional. There are a few submission options. There's a traditional a fast track, and a direct to phase 2 option. The traditional one is, and kind of the timeline, I'm giving you a feel for what to expect for timeline here also. The first part is to write and submit a phase 1, 4 months minimum. 6 months is better, but 4 months minimum to write it, especially for the first one. It takes about 3 months for the agencies to review that. And if awarded, it takes anywhere from 1 to 2 months to actually get all the paperwork and everything, by the time of the council meeting, everything done before you start the studies. You perform the phase 1 studies. After that, you write another proposal. It gets reviewed. It gets awarded, and then you do the phase 2 study. So you can see there's this gap of 4 to 7 months between a phase 1 and a phase 2 study, where there's no money coming in, there's nothing being done, there's nothing being funded by the company. So that's a downside of the traditional approach. The fast track is a program where basically you write the phase 1 and the phase 2 grant proposal at the same time. It gets reviewed, and when it's awarded, you perform the phase 1 study. And if you meet the criteria that you set forth in that phase 1 study, then you just automatically go to the phase 2. There's not a resubmission, there's not another review. It's there and done. So you save that gap in funding. And you're also don't have to worry about the second phase not being awarded. There's also a program that's called a direct to phase 2. So phase 2 obviously has more money. And a lot of people, including myself, think of the phase 1. The purpose of phase 1 is, yes, it's proof of concept, but another purpose is to get to phase 2. And so you can go directly to phase 2, write it, review, gets award, and you do the phase 2 study. So those are the options. And I'll go through kind of how do you choose which option in just a minute. So one question I get asked all the time: which should I submit, an SBIR or an STTR? And I have success rates here for those programs. This is from 2020. I put Washington State and then all the states. And there are a few things to note in here. So for example, the phase 1 for all states, the success rate is about 12%. STTR, 17%. So you might think initially that, okay, maybe if I have the opportunity, I should submit for an STTR. I'm going to suggest not doing that in some cases in just a minute. Phase 2 is much higher percentages, so 30%. So once you have a phase 1, it's much more likely that you're going to get a phase 2 award. The fast track award is 17%, so it's higher than the phase 1. So you might think that, well, maybe I should just go for the fast track. I can save time. And yes, if you can do it, that's great, but there are some conditions to being able to do that. I'll talk to you in just a minute too. The direct to phase 2, 19%, so not as good as the phase 2 going through the traditional approach. So those are some considerations for should I submit an SBIR or an STTR. So again, you might think, all right, maybe I should submit an STTR if I can. The other thing that I want to emphasize, and I know a lot of grant consultants will kind of promote themselves as getting first submissions are being awarded and their high percentage and so forth. It really doesn't work that way. I mean, I help customers and clients, and many of them get awarded on the first submission, yes, but very often it's the second submissions, and the success rates for the second submissions are much higher. You submit it, the reviewers have their own biases and their own opinions. And I think there are some other factors that enter into it. You'll get a summary sheet, and then you respond to their critique on that, and the success rates are much higher. Now 18% are much higher. Now 18%. Oh, getting that feedback again. Okay. So the bottom line here, I have some clients that get very disappointed. So I always tell clients that it's likely it will take 2 submissions for these things. if you stick it out, if you have a viable product, if it's significant, if it's innovative, if you've got the facilities and the commercialization potential, there's very, very high probability that if you submit a proposal, a quality proposal, that it will get funded. Sometimes you just have to stick it out. Okay, so should I submit an SBIR or STTR? Well, obviously, if you're an academic institution or not an academic institution, SBIR is your only option. If you have an academic partner, you have a choice, SBIR or STTR. If your principal investigator is going to be at the academic institution, then STTR is going to work for you. Or perhaps your team, if you have an academic team that's really, really strong, you might consider an STTR. But my fallback is really an SBIR. And here's the rationale for that. And this is just coming from my experience. I really don't have any strong data to support it, but I think it's pretty true. STTRs are typically done through academic or nonprofit institutions. They're very highly qualified. They write very good proposals because that's what they're used to doing. And so the competition is actually pretty strong in terms of, think of a race, and if there's 10 horses, all 10 horses are thoroughbred. So you're competing against all of the others in that field. For an SBIR, a lot of those are, putting it nicely, a lot of those are not very good. So take 30% or 40% of those, and they're just not viable. They're not. So if you're in that race, 4 or 5 of those horses, they're not horses, they're actually donkeys or something. They're not competitive. So even though it appears that it's lower frequency, it's actually higher. Okay. So feel free to ask questions anytime if you want. I know I'm flying through this pretty quickly. So another question, should I submit a traditional fast track or direct to phase 2? And again, here are the programs. There's certainly a lot of incentive for fast track or direct to phase 2 in terms of timing and lack of a lag period. But most companies are not ready for it. So a traditional phase 1, so a traditional approach for a phase 1 is it's a 6-page document for the research document. That's the main document. You have all the other things that have to be done, but it's a 6-page document with a small component for commercialization. So it's much easier to put together. You don't have to have quite as many of your ducks in a row to get going. For a fast track, it's a 12-page research plan. It has both the phase 1 objectives and the phase 2 objectives in it. And there's a 12-page commercialization plan. And that commercialization plan, to be viable, needs substantial supporting data. And most companies aren't ready for that. Now, I do find that VC-funded or angel-funded companies tend to get more commercialization assistance, so they tend to be stronger. And so it is definitely something to consider if those things are in place, but it is a much more rigorous, a much more time-consuming process also. And then a direct to phase 2, again, a 12-page research plan. In this case, you need substantial supporting data. Proof of concepts needs to be done, and you need a lot of data to justify going to a direct to phase 2. And then it also includes a 12-page commercialization plan. So very often, the traditional approach is where people end up. So my perception for fast track or phase 2, you must have strong supporting data to go to a fast track or phase 2. It has to be well substantiated for a commercialization plan. And as part of that plan, what really helps tremendously is to have actual primary market data. Identify who your customers are, ask them, present that data for the market in the grant proposal. because again, commercialization is very important. And these programs have gotten burned in the past significantly from companies. The science sounds really good, everything is great, and then it gets commercialization and nobody wants their products. So having proof of that is really important in these. And also some program officers, especially recently, have been telling me that the fast tracks and especially the fast tracks really put and have an impact on their future budgets. They prefer not to fund as many of those as they have in the past. So there is kind of a resistance to those that I've seen recently. But the bottom line is you can always ask the program officer or director. All right, can SBIR be utilized to research the repurpose a current technology? Absolutely. So that was Fletcher. Yes, you can. I'll talk to that a little bit. Oh, what is NIH? Sorry, National Institutes of Health. Yes, you can repurpose a current technology. So if it requires some innovation, if it requires some tweaking, by all means, you can do that. Now, if it's straightforward and there's no, if it's just a commercialization effort of something, then no. But if you have to do something to make it fit for a new purpose, then by all means, that's a good use. All right, where to apply? Well, you want to apply where the money is. That would make sense. So these are some of the agencies that are supported by the SBIR STTR program. So you can see the Department of Defense has the largest budget. Health and Human Services, so that includes the National Institutes of Health and others. Center for Disease Control is in there and a few other agencies. Department of Energy has budgets, National Science Foundation. I'll hit upon a few of these. I obviously can't cover all of them. But there are some obviously that have more money than others. So if you're talking about the standards and technology, they have 3.9 million for a budget. And if you figure that a phase 2 is 1.5 to 2, I mean, they're going to fund only 1 or 2 a year, whereas something like NIH or the Health and Human Services have 1.15 billion, so they can fund much more. There's also a difference in how that money is being distributed. Some of them are in the forms of grants. So those are shown in green here. So Health and Human Services, Department of Energy, National Science Foundation, those are grants. Others are predominantly contracts. So that would be Department of Defense and NASA. So what are those differences? Because they're substantially different. For a contracting agent, the agency basically establishes the plans, the protocols, the requirements. They're highly focused topics. They have procurement mechanisms. They're invoiced for the progress. It's a very tightly controlled system. The nice thing with those is that there's often and typically a binding agreement. So if you have a DoD grant, for example, the Department of Defense will be a customer of yours, an exclusive customer for your product. They will not buy other products from other places if they support an SBIR grant for a number of years. I forget how many years. If it's a grant, usually those are principal investigator initiated. They're less topic specific. They have more flexibility. The upfront funding is available, and it supports public efforts and best efforts in research. Yes, the presentation will be available afterwards. So I'm just going to hit upon a couple of these agencies very quickly. NIH, National Institutes of Health, is a major one. I get a lot of proposals for that. Anything health related is basically falls under National Institutes of Health, and it's very broad, cancer to cardiology to you name it. So if it's medically related, so if it's medically significant, it falls under NIH. And there are proposals, there are mechanisms for both clinical trials are allowed and where they're not allowed. Very often, it's kind of a choice. Is it NIH or is it National Science Foundation, NSF? So I've got the mission statement for NSF here, and it's mostly technology based. So if you have a proposal, even if it's medically oriented, if you have a proposal, but it's very technology oriented, so maybe it's a technology to enable a medical application, that fits. Most engineering things will fit into here in National Science Foundation, among other places, but that's the biggest distinction. Canadian company with a US subsidiary, can you apply for the grants? If the work is being done in the United States and not in Canada, so if it's actually physically being done, then I would say yes, but it would be something you'd want to check into to be sure on that. But probably, if the work's being done in Canada, then that's a problem. And there's really no way. I've tried. It's not going to go. You can get exceptions supposedly, but they're really hard to do. And NIH and all the agencies, they don't do it. So it's unlikely. So kind of a strategy to think about. Again, medical, think NIH, non-medical, likely NSF or other agents. I'm just comparing mostly NIH and NSF here. If it's a technology to enable medical, then you consider either NIH or NSF. And in fact, what a lot of people don't do is they think of one grant, like they're going to get one grant and that's it. I have companies that I've worked with that have 5 of these proposals, 6 of them for different aspects. Somebody asked me about, take it to a new indication. Yes, you can do that. So you can consider maybe an NSF for maybe if there's a technology. So if there's a engineering accomplishment that needs to be done to enable, say, a medical device, that could be an NSF project. And once that's accomplished and you're going to apply it to a medical indication, maybe then you go to an NIH. Are personal guarantees required? Grant or no, they're not. I'm going to speak briefly on Department of Defense because Department of Defense is very, very different. Yes, they have a lot of money, but their procurement is very different. They release announcements 3 times a year, both for broad agents and announcements and commercialization, commercial solutions openings. There are a lot of agencies, so I've just listed them here. I'm not going to go through them, but there are a lot of them. Army, Navy, Air Force, all of these have different components. They all have different missions. They all support different things. So it's if you feel that you have something that's relevant, you can look it up and you can see. But here's the thing with Department of Defense. This is not only my perception, some of it's absolute, but some of it's my perception too. The Department of Defense is complex beyond what I can really go through with any detail here at all. The funds are very, they fund very diverse things. Department of Defense funds breast cancer research, for example. They fund all sorts of different things that are related to both military in terms of equipment and facilities, but also in terms of health and so forth. But really important is you must establish a relationship with the Department of Defense before submission. Minimally, you want to contact them before submission to let them know your interest. You usually almost always have a letter of intent. But here's what's to keep in the back of your mind. Yes, you can compete for the things that they come out. They will come out with a set of projects that they want to have done 3 times a year. Often, though, those funding opportunities are in response to white papers that are given to the Department of Defense. often, sometimes lobbyists will lobby Congress. Many universities, for example, hire lobbyists for the DoD to present white papers to them with the sole purpose of having a FOA, so a request for application, a funding opportunity announcement to be made specific to their project. And so it can be really tough to compete with that. So it is a process that you want to establish a relationship. You might want to think about having a white paper yourself, and if nothing else, getting to know the officials at Department of Defense, having a conversation and getting that relationship. It's all about the relationship with the Department of Defense. And then there are other funding opportunities outside of the SBIR in STR programs. So there are a lot of programs that companies very often forget about because they don't know they're available. Typically, they're available to academic institutions. Many of those are still available to companies too. Right? Does SBIR allow federal contract, teaming, and subcontract? Yes, you can. There are limitations for how much you can contract and subcontract, but yes, you can. And in fact, if you go over, these agencies are amazing. If you have a problem, say you want to, they like your proposal, they fund it, and you have an issue with the subcontracting, they will work with you. They'll work with you, or they'll work with your budgets. They want to fund you. They go out of their way to make it happen for you. They come up with all sorts of creative ways to assist. They really are a partner once you get this award. Any other questions before I? All right. So I want to just talk a little bit about strategy and framing, just to get you thinking about different ways of presenting things to increase the probability of success and things that you might think about. So obviously you need to know your audience, and you can frame things to different audiences. You might do exactly the same work, but you can frame it so that the significance or the innovation is appropriate for one agency versus another, depending on which one might have a higher probability for success for you. Mm-hmm. So one thing you obviously want to look at is which agency has the most money. So that's one thing. You might want to frame something to an agency that has money. So if you're looking at, National Institute of Standards, they don't fund very many. If you can frame it so that it would fit another agency, that's something to consider. But even in those agencies, so this is, again, I focus on National Institutes of Health. I just can't cover everything. But even within those, there are different agencies, and you can consider framing to agencies that might give you a higher probabilities for success. So if we look at the National Cancer Institute, NCI, and a phase 1, so the R43, 6%. It's the hardest one to get. It's 6%. They get a lot of applications in the National Cancer Institute. They have a lot of money, but they also don't fund. It takes a perfect grant to do it. It's hard. It can be done, but it's hard. But if you can instead perhaps reframe it to the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, that has a 28% chance. So it's consideration. Very often you can reframe the question, do very similar, if not identical, aims, but just reframe the context. So instead of framing it around the context of lung cancer, frame it along the context of maybe lung, maybe it's an imaging grant or something like that. You can frame an imaging grant for cancer, or you can frame it for the Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, just as an example. Also think about, and we've kind of touched upon this briefly, think about multiple awards in terms of a strategy. You can get a grant that targets a market with a certain requirement of a technology, and a second grant could use a similar technology, but maybe you have to tweak it and it has different requirements. Those can be two separate grants. Example, you might have an imaging of the lung that might require some technological advancement for the lung, and you might have to adapt it for a liver imaging. Those can be two separate grants. You can have an innovative engineering for one application and adapt that to another application. Perfectly fine. You could get multiple grants on those. And especially after you have a first award, the agencies, and you're successful. Uh-oh. Anyone else having trouble hearing me?
No, you're loud and clear.
All right, good, thank you. Yeah, you can tweak these. You could get multiple. So somebody asked that question. Ask it actually. You can tweak them for another application and get a different proposal. You might think about one for a non-clinical track. Maybe it's a preclinical studies, and another one has a clinical track, a follow-up proposal. So I always encourage companies to think about multiples, because it does take a while to get these. Okay, so what's the process? I use NIH again as an example, and it does vary agency to agency, but there are a lot of similarities in these. And at least for NIH, there are some important people to consider. The most important one is a program official. For NSF, it'd be the program director, Department of Defense. So they have different names, but there is a person that fills this role for most, if not all, of the agencies. The program official for NIH is the point of contact prior to submission and after submission. They can be your best friend if you let them. Think of them as your partner. The scientific review article pretty much takes control of the grant while it's being reviewed. The grants management officer can assist with, after it's funded, with questions or things you might have. But the most important person is that program official. So how to apply, and I'm giving you this kind of as a feel. So if you're working with a company and the company might be going to submit for one of these, it can kind of give you a feel for what the process is, how much time commitment there is, because the first proposal is going to take more time than the rest. So there's some things that you need to do. You need to check eligibility. There are multiple registrations to do, and the registrations can be very problematic if they don't work. So those need to be done well in advance. You need to establish collaborators, attain letters of support. There are biosketches for key individuals. They have to be agency-specific biosketches. They have to conform to their formats. You need to establish your objectives or what you're actually going to do. If you have animals, you need to consider your internal review board requirements. Human subjects, the same thing. Is it a clinical trial? Is it not? If it's a clinical trial, there are a lot of other hoops and hurdles that you need to do. There's a whole new set of information that you have to do. You need to determine the budget. Is the budget sufficient to support what you're proposing to do? You need to get formal quotes for that budget. Identify the facilities that you're going to be using and the equipment that you need. There's all these things have to be kind of put in place in preparation for applying. Then you write the application, and there are a number of different documents. There's, for NIH, there's a specific name for it. It's a summary page. It's a confidential summary page. Think of it as an executive summary. They're called different things in different agencies, but they all have this. It's a confidential form. There's also typically a summary of some sort that's non-confidential. So once you get an award, they share the non-confidential with everyone for disclosure. There's a short little narrative. There's a research plan that I mentioned, 6 pages, 12 pages for NIH. It's different lengths for different agencies. NSF and DoD will be longer. Sometimes there's a commercialization plan. There's a facility statement that needs to put together. There's the equipment that needs to be put together in a document. There are animal documents, there are human subject documents, there are clinical trial documents. So there's a lot of documents. And again, the first submission is always the hardest. So I don't want to scare you away from doing it, but there is some time commitment to putting these together. After you write a specific aims page or that summary page, I do highly recommend getting a hold and sending it to the program official to get their feedback. Again, you're building that relationship. They can help you for where to apply. You can have a primary agency and a secondary agency. They can help you with that. You can find if it actually fits their programs. They can help direct you to where it might fit better. And these program officials are typically scientists or engineers themselves. They have expertise, and they can provide you with a lot of. They won't tell you how to do your research or that, but they will understand what you're doing. They will understand what you're targeting, and they can help you in that process. And they like to. It's their job, and they like to feel part of the project. Actually, if you can get them excited about your project, they can help you in so many ways. And I'll get to one of those closer to the end of the presentation here. And then there's forms, and I'm not going to spend any time on forms, but there's an application guide that's a great starting point. It's trumped by the funding opportunity announcements, and that is by updates to those. The bottom line here is you need to keep track of these things and make sure that you're not missing something silly. So what's the flow? What happens? You submit this, it's submitted online. It goes typically to grants.gov. Grants.gov it takes everything for DoD and all the agencies. Things go through grants.gov, and that'll confirm that things comply with the submission requirements. For NIH, it will go to ERA Commons. For other agencies, it'll go other places. ERA Commons is kind of a landing ground for the investigator. This is where you can go to see what the status of your proposal is. It'll tell you when it's going to be reviewed, when the council meeting is going to review. It'll provide your summary statements after the review is done and your scores. So it's a good site to be aware of. From ERA Commons, then in this case, this example, it goes to NIH. It goes to an integrated review group. There will be a chief that'll assign it to a panel, and it will get reviewed typically within a couple months. 2 to 2.5 months, 3 months at the most. After that, you'll get a summary of the review with the positives and negatives, and the scores go to the program officer. If it isn't funded, you can use that summary review to update your next proposal. And again, that's typically where things get funded. Scores go to the program officer, and let's say you are funded or not funded. The final approval actually occurs in a council meeting. And here, the program officers can have some influence. Mostly, if you have a low score, so if you're below the pay line, so it was reviewed favorably, most of the time it will get funded. I have had one proposal, and I still don't know why. It got a fabulous score, but they didn't fund it, and I really don't know why. That's pretty rare. What I see more often is a proposal that gets close to being funded, but the program officer or the program official really likes the proposal. So that's, again, where that relationship comes in. They understand your work. If they really like it, and if it's close to being awarded, they have some power. If there's money left over, they negotiate with one another, and they can do it. I have one of those right now from a client that it was her first submission, and she was, I think, two points away from being under the pay line, but the program official really very much liked her proposal. I mean, it was one reviewer that kind of killed it. So I think it's going to get funded. But okay, so I've got a few minutes left. So what's important? when you're putting these things together, you want to ask yourself, and you want to present yourself as a specialist. So I always ask my clients to look at themselves and say, are you a commodity or are you a specialty? And the reason I ask this is, if I'm going to give money to somebody, can I give it to you? Can I give it to somebody else? Is there anything special about you? Or are you pretty special? Are you pretty centered? And do you have something that very few people have that's really exciting? And that's where you want to be. But the only way to do that is to convey it and to make sure that it comes through. And there are things that people in proposals consistently don't do. They don't, and the biggest of those is they don't provide enough contrast. If you don't tell people what is different about your product versus other products, if you don't tell people what is different about your team, or maybe your environment has or facilities or reagents are specialized and important, that you have the capabilities of doing this where others don't, they aren't going to figure it out themselves. So it's really super important. And I'm running out of time, so I'm going to sketch this. I just put together an example for a couple pitches to demonstrate the process. So a few closing notes. A lot of my clients are from academia or industry. Some have experience in grant preparations and writing, and they understand what needs to be done. They have the expertise. So mostly the assistance they need is some editing and those kind of registrations, those kind of things. There are very few in that category. Most are not comfortable with marketing and sales as it relates to proposal development. They're not familiar with the scientific rigor that for their tasks. They don't understand their markets and the competitive advantage. And the process of writing the grant proposal puts all of that into focus. So it forces them to pay attention to the critical path for attaining a product, a proof of concept, and for product development. It forces them to critically evaluate the competitors and the competitive advantage and focus on commercialization that they might not have had before. And what I see a lot, even with investors and business consultants as part of the team, so you've got investors and business consultants, you've got your inventors and your researchers, of course. You might even have technology consultants. What I see a lot is the investors and business consultants really play heavily into the commercialization aspects of things. So the commercialization actually looks pretty good, usually. And that makes sense, because who's going to invest in something that doesn't have commercialization potential? So it kind of makes sense. The technology consultants typically can weigh in on the technology. Is it innovative? Is it not? Is it really, is it good technology? Is it not? And for that, it's really, really useful. But very typically, it falls apart there. They don't have a lot to do with the plans for proof of the technology and for the development plan. The consultants, they just don't have the time. So the role of a good grant consultant is to take the perspective of a grant reviewer and challenge each and every component of that. Yes, we'll share it as a slide deck. Validate and clarify the logic and define the weaknesses in the proposal, both improve for concept, the development plan, commercialization, all of those. And then know how to put it in a compelling elevator pitch to get enthusiasm for the project, and then follow it up with diligence, due diligence in terms of rigor and potential. And what I have typically found is, I would say with 90% of my clients, they make significant and beneficial changes to their product development plans. I get feedback very often that even if they don't, get the grant award, they still, the process itself was incredibly valuable. I actually get that comment from venture capital and angel people too. It's really, it really puts you at least when I help clients, and there are others out there that are good. They're about, I'm not going to go into that too much in terms of it. You want to get somebody who's qualified, probably somebody with a science or engineering background is best, and that has experience in this to do that. But anyway, I get the feedback all the time that people find it incredibly valuable just to go through the process. And of course, getting the grants and I have a pretty good feel for when I get into the projects. Is it viable or is it not? If I really feel it's viable, the probability of getting an award is really, really high. It might take a few submissions, but if people stick it out, we'll get there. Do I offer services? I do. I get more requests that I can handle. I'm trying to bring in somebody to help me, and I'm also taking on another role with a company, cardiology company myself. That is a really exciting company for suppression of chronic heart failure following heart attacks. There's nothing out there, and it's exciting. So I'm kind of doing that too. So yes, I do. I would encourage you to. My email address is on this presentation, and it'll be shared there, and we'll make the presentation available. So you can always reach out to me. Like I said, I enjoy doing these things, and I find them interesting and so forth. Okay, and that is it. So are there any other questions? I see we have 2 minutes. Is there anything that people have questions on? I mean, I took my best guess. If I was an investor, what would I want to know? Is there anything that it didn't cover that you would like to hear more about? And if you do, I'm happy to reply offline too. If you ever want to send me an email or whatever, and I'm more than happy to reply if you have questions there too.
Okay. It looks like there are no questions. So I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. I know there were many questions about the presentation. If you signed on the Eventbrite, yes, we will be sending out the slides that Robert went through. And I think everyone who wants this information has this information. And so with that, I'll really like to thank Robert for spending an hour with us, sharing his expertise and lots of valuable and detailed information. Thank you very much, Robert.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you. And also thanks to all for joining us and for participating in our session today. All right. So with that, I'd like to end our workshop today. And again, thanks to everyone. Have a great rest of the week.
Great. Thanks.